Okay, hey, good evening, everybody. Woohoo! Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Michael Crockett on behalf of the Larchmont Edgewater Civic League Board of Directors. Welcome to our atypical meeting. We normally don't meet this particular Monday of the month, but when we have a really big deal going on, we call the audible and do it. And excited to have a big crowd here. I understand not only do we have our own neighbors here, we've got folks from other civic leagues. I think I heard Meadowbrook, Lock Haven. Anybody else? Algonquin Park. Look at that. This is great. A lot of folks interested for some reason in Hampton Boulevard traffic. I don't know why, but it tends to draw a pretty big crowd. Before we get started, just a couple of quick Civic League announcements, not a normal meeting. We had the rat race, unfortunately, canceled due to weather, but a lot of great money was raised for Larchmont Elementary. That was great news. We had the big pumpkin offload. Fortunately, people with much younger backs showed up. 3,500 something pumpkins out here with ODU students, neighbors, everybody else chipping in. A lot of fun had there. I just talked to our community relations officer. He was here just a moment ago and said they've had a bicycle stolen, a fanny pack stolen, and a couple of other minor things, so not a lot to put out there. But before we get started, I just wanted to, we always recognize our VIPs. It's a bad joke. It's the neighbors. That's why we're all here. But we've also got some great Americans here. We've got our two city council women up here. We've got Courtney Doyle and Andrea McClellan. These folks do so much for us on a daily basis. It's amazing the amount of phone calls, the amount of emails. It's always good news. It's always positive. They never have to deal with any challenges at all. It's a gravy train, but we are lucky to have both of you, and thank you very much for your leadership. And tonight, also, for your leadership, Hampton Boulevard Task Force Chair. It's a big deal. And I think for everybody, you're about to hear a lot. I'm not going to steal all the thunder because there's a lot of good thunder, I think, to have happen here. But what you're going to see tonight, I think, is a culminating event where all the goodness happens. Issues come up. There's civic discourse. We all get together. We hear each other's opinions. It takes the city officials elected. It takes a task force for Hampton Boulevard Task Force. It takes some incredible public servants from the Department of Transportation who have multiple town halls. It takes surveys. We had our own Civic League survey. Maybe you guys did too. The City of Norfolk had a survey. These good people who are here in support tonight did all the analysis of all that. So what's about to happen, I think, is you're going to see that good byproduct of really what civics is all about. So tonight, I think, is a good news story overall. So thanks for being here and making a difference and caring. How about that? Good stuff. All right. And speaking of a guy who somehow finds himself between citizens who have concerns all the time, elected officials who have the ultimate responsibility for public safety. He works for a city manager. He's pulled every which way and does it all amazingly. And I thank you and your entire team. John, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mike. You must have been in my office today. Thank you again. It's a great turnout, and we really appreciate your interest in this. And so with that being said, I would just add one thing. For those of you that are here from the Meadowbrook and Lock Haven Civic Leagues, I will tell you that what you're going to see tonight is a very similar product that you're going to see for the study that we're going to be conducting on the north side of the bridge. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. So I would, again, I'm John Stevenson. I'm the Director of Department of Transportation with the city. And with me I have Keith Darrow. He's the City Transportation Engineer. And then we have our consultant team from Kimberly Horn and Associates, Emily Mosier and Brian Foster. Boy, I almost said something else. With that being said, let's just go ahead and get started. There's a lot of material here. I will tell you that this presentation will be on our webpage within a couple of days after the meeting, so you'll have an opportunity to dive into some of those details that we'll kind of gloss over a little bit. But with that being said, I'll turn it over to Emily.
Thank you, John, and I'll echo all the thanks to all of you for being here. Let me just try to get my clicker situated. So as John mentioned, we have been conducting this study. We started in the spring. We met with many of you in April, at the April meeting. We had an online survey, as Mike mentioned. We've collected that data. At the previous meeting, we presented lots of crash analysis and other data. And so tonight, we're really going to be focusing on, and we had introduced some potential improvements at that last meeting, which we also asked for that feedback online about. And so we're going to be stepping through kind of what we heard from the feedback from you all, and how did we evaluate those potential improvements? How do they stack up against each other based on some of the goals of the study and the project, and ultimately what has been recommended for the study. Just what I just went through. All right. So again, we were here last April over in the other room. We had a full house, and so that's why we wanted to make sure we had plenty of seating tonight. So heard from many of you there who spoke up during the meeting. Again, we shared lots of data during that meeting, got some feedback from you all, and did some Q&A. And then we conducted this survey. The survey was open for 3 weeks in the spring. That was distributed to members of the Civic League. Other adjacent Civic Leagues as well should have gotten a link to take that survey. City of Norfolk website, I believe, posted it as well. And so you can see we had, excuse me, 272 individuals responded, the majority of which are part of the Larchmont or Edgewater neighborhoods. We did have some folks from nearby Meadowbrook and Lock Haven. And then we had about 5% of the respondents who don't live in the vicinity of Hampton Boulevard, but travel on Hampton Boulevard on a regular basis. So we asked a few questions as far as folks' travel habits on Hampton Boulevard, what they see as certain issues. And so one of the questions we asked was, do you cross Hampton Boulevard as a pedestrian? So you can see a mix of responses here. We've got about 35% said yes, but I don't feel safe doing so. We have some others who say, yes, I do, and it feels safe. And then others who say, no, I don't want to, or no, but I would if it was safer. And so we know that this is part of the desire to increase pedestrian safety along Hampton Boulevard. We also asked, where do you cross Hampton Boulevard as a pedestrian? And you can see the top 3 responses there are all signalized intersections, so they're crossing at an existing traffic signal. We have a handful who just say, I don't cross Hampton Boulevard on foot, and a very small number who actually cross at the existing intersection at Jamestown Crescent. We wanted to know, what are your top transportation and safety concerns on Hampton Boulevard? I apologize if this text is small, but again, we'll post this online. So the number 1 issue for folks was driver speeding. That's the biggest concern that we heard. It's the same thing we heard, echoed in the last meeting and what we saw in the data analysis that we did with the speed data. Another significant one is the number of trucks driving on Hampton Boulevard. That's something that we heard a lot as well in the survey, in people's general comments and feedback. So those are really the 2 biggest concerns that folks had. And then just in no particular order, we had some open-ended questions on the survey as well. Just what are some of your other concerns? And so we heard a number of things. We heard about folks concerned about pass-through traffic. Red light running was a major concern that we heard mentioned by multiple people, as well as concern for bike and pedestrian safety, as well as people taking the opportunity on that question to tell us why they didn't want a traffic signal. And then on the survey, we walked through a number of potential improvements that we had presented in the last meeting, and provided some information about those on the survey just to gauge the level of support for the different potential improvements. And so, scale of 1 to 5, 1 is strongly opposing, 3 is neutral, 5 is strongly in support of that solution. And so the improvement with the least amount of support was the traffic signal. The most support was for median landscaping and lighting enhancements along the corridor. And then everything else fell kind of somewhere in the middle. So we're going to step through each of these individually. All right, so there's, again, a lot of data up there. We'll try to touch on it, but we're happy to answer questions after this. So first, looking at a potential traffic signal, some of you may have seen this design previously. So this is a partially designed signal at the intersection. So looking at it, again, this would install a traffic signal at all 5 legs of the intersection, so Hampton, Jamestown, Richmond, and Hanover. There'd be no right turn on red allowed. There'd be a couple of other turn restrictions associated with the signal. It would be coordinated with the other signals on the corridor. But some of the benefits provided by a signal would be providing a safe crossing for pedestrians and also improving safety by reducing some of the conflicts that exist at that intersection today. But some of the drawbacks, of course, are the price tag. So we've got that listed in the bottom corner there, the bottom right corner. Nearly $1 million estimated cost for that signal for design and construction. And there's also, of course, the potential to increase stops on Hampton Boulevard based on the spacing with the other signals. Even if they're coordinated, you're generally going to have to stop at one of the directions, probably not both, but one of the directions. And of course, again, this had the lowest support from the 2 surveys that were done, one separately by the Civic League last year, and then the one that we did earlier this year. We also considered a pedestrian hybrid beacon. So this is a specialized type of signal that is basically blank until the button is pushed. Then a pedestrian pushes the button, it flashes for the pedestrian to cross, and then basically traffic is able to continue once that crosswalk is clear. So it's less disruptive than a traditional traffic signal, but still provides a safe crossing. Definitely a lower cost than a traditional traffic signal, so estimated rough cost $250,000 to $400,000. These are planning level costs. But one of the drawbacks here is that these are typically installed at mid-block locations so that vehicles on a side street don't think that they can use that signal, to cross Hampton Boulevard in a car. And the blocks, of course, along this section of Hampton Boulevard are very short, so there's really not a good candidate location to put a pedestrian hybrid beacon on the corridor. Intersection conflict warning system, this we kind of quickly dismissed as not really appropriate for this type of corridor. These are usually more typically used in more rural applications. This is a sign system that detects when there's traffic approaching, either on the cross street or the main line, to warn traffic that's coming. So again, we didn't think that this was as appropriate for the neighborhood that we're in. And then we had talked a little bit at the previous meeting about options for channelization. We didn't really have any graphical depiction of that, so this is just a very rough concept. In the green, this would basically install a physical buffer on the north side of the intersection between the 2 through lanes that continue on Hampton and then the outside lane that Jamestown Crescent can turn into. That's a very wide outside lane today, and so you have the space that you could install, excuse me, like a concrete barrier or buffer between there to separate that traffic. So that would reduce the conflicts between northbound Hampton Boulevard traffic and then traffic trying to turn off of Jamestown Crescent. This also would propose adding what we call a bump out at Hanover Avenue that would basically restrict that to right turn only. So you would remove the conflict of vehicles making a left turn from southbound Hampton Boulevard onto Hanover, because there have been a number of crashes associated with that movement. There's also the potential for some additional channelization on the south side of the intersection to kind of separate the traffic on Jamestown and on Hampton Boulevard as well. And so, excuse me, this would have some of the advantages of, again, reducing some of the conflicts where we've seen a lot of the crashes at the intersection on that area north of the intersection where you have the merging traffic occurring. And that buffer may also help to slow down some of the traffic because you wouldn't have such a wide open area on the outside lane for Hampton Boulevard. A few of the considerations and challenges here: this would not have a significant impact on pedestrian safety, unfortunately, this particular improvement. We also need to consider there is one private driveway that's on that block between Hanover and the next intersection, so we would need to consider that in where that channelizing buffer ends so that those folks can still access their driveway. So those are two of the main considerations with this one. And this one has a wide range for the cost because it depends on how much channelization you put in. If you just do the northern portion of it, that's about $300,000. It could certainly go higher if you were to fully build out kind of the southern portion of the intersection. Rest and red operations at existing traffic signals. So this is a method by which you install additional sensors for some of the existing traffic signals, and you let them rest in a red condition as opposed to a green condition on the main road. And with the proper detection, if a vehicle is traveling at an appropriate speed, which can be, set to a certain threshold, whether that's the speed limit or speed limit plus 5 or 7, whatever it is deemed to be, then it will turn green for them by the time they get to the signal. If they are speeding, it will stay red, basically make them stop and wait. And so this is another potential improvement that could be implemented at one or more of the existing traffic signals on the corridor. And so this is a fairly low-cost improvement. The sensor equipment runs between $25,000 and $50,000 per intersection, and studies have shown have a positive effect on speeds. A couple considerations there is that generally it's done more so late at night when the volumes are lower, but that is also when you get some of the riskier speeding behaviors, when people feel like there's not as much traffic out there and they can go a lot faster. And then we mentioned that the median landscaping and lighting enhancements, this actually received the most support on the survey. It is, I don't want to call it a catch-all, but it does kind of have a lot of different, more of the street character, streetscape improvements kind of tied together. So one of the things, so this would involve planting additional trees both in the median and on both sides of Hampton Boulevard. And so that can sometimes have a narrowing effect, kind of an optical illusion to visually narrow the road to help slow drivers down. This would also involve taking a look and evaluating the existing lighting and seeing if there are locations where the lighting needs to be, improved. And again, there's a range for this depending on what type of lighting fixtures and where we put the trees. I know John has spoken to the arborist, and so they've got some ideas on the trees that could be appropriate here, but a range of $150,000 to $250,000 probably for this. Again, for that segment from Magnolia up to Jamestown. And one of the challenges for this would be just needing to make sure that we're appropriately accounting for line of sight at intersections and driveways and not making that worse. We don't want to have additional crashes because of that. And then we also looked at additional speed feedback signs. This is another one that the city has put additional signs out there in the last few years, and so you've really got them at several locations already on the corridor. So while they wouldn't necessarily be a detriment, there's not necessarily a large enough gap that these are really needed at this time. And then finally, we looked at just doing some turn restrictions, particularly at the Jamestown Crescent intersection. So we mentioned with a couple of the other options at the signal and with the channelization, restricting the southbound left from coming down Hampton Boulevard, heading south, trying to turn onto Hanover Avenue. Similarly, looking at restricting the left turn coming off of Jamestown Crescent, so folks who would try to turn left to go south on Hampton Boulevard or onto Richmond Crescent on the other side of Hampton. Those movements today, currently, there's no signage prohibiting them. It is a small number of folks who are making that risk to do it, but we have seen crashes associated with those movements and patterns. And so this is certainly the lowest cost solution, just to put out some signs. You'll see this when this is posted, but this is just a matrix summarizing all the things we just talked about in very tiny print. All right, so taking all of those things into consideration, we've kind of split our recommendations into short-term and then some additional enhancements that might be needed once the short-term improvements are in place. So starting out, looking at doing some turn restrictions. So like we just talked about on the previous slide, immediately restricting that southbound left from Hampton onto Hanover, as well as the left turn movements coming off of Jamestown. So that'll be a very much quicker, easy thing to install to at least restrict those movements so that folks know that they can't do that. And then you could also consider doing some additional turning movement restrictions at that intersection, which could either be all day or by just during certain hours. So for example, the heading north on Hampton, trying to make the left onto Richmond Crescent, as well as other movements from Hanover and from Richmond. So those are, again, those could be considered as additional restrictions in addition to the two that we talked about. And then also looking, and so those are shown, the ones in red are the movements that we recommend restricting, as soon as possible, and then the ones in orange are additional ones to consider. And then the rest in red operations that we talked about with the traffic signal, where again, they would rest in red. If you're going at an appropriate speed, the sensor will detect you, it'll give you a green. Otherwise, it's gonna stay red if you're speeding. We recommend doing a pilot of that type of operation, starting with the signal at Lexington Avenue. So there are some upcoming improvements at that intersection that this could be incorporated into the improvements that are already gonna be happening there. And so this would give the city and the neighborhoods an opportunity to see how that impacts the speeds and the traffic, and if that has the effect that we wanted to in lowering some of the speeds, particularly for folks coming off of the bridge. In addition, we recommend moving forward with the lighting and landscaping enhancements. So again, adding some additional trees in the median on both sides of the roadway. And then again, evaluating the lighting, making sure we've got appropriate levels of lighting everywhere, enhancing that to reduce, excuse me, the instance of some of the nighttime crashes that we've seen on the corridor. And so again, all of these are generally lower cost, shorter time frame to implement types of improvements. So try to get some quick wins, some kind of lower hanging fruit out there. Now, if speed still persists, if there still seems to be some safety, if we see worsening or continuing safety issues, then there are some additional improvements that could be implemented, a little bit beyond the short-term recommendations. And so those would include basically expanding on the rest in red operations to some of the other signals on the corridor, so at Magnolia and Bowling in particular. So if it works well at Lexington, let's go ahead and extend that. And then also installing the channelization that we talked about, particularly on the north side of the intersection, so what's shown circled in red there. So again, that would separate the 3 lanes on the north side of the intersection, 2 for Hampton Boulevard, 1 for Jamestown Crescent. And it would install that bump out to restrict Hanover Avenue to physically only be able to make a right turn. So vehicles would not be able to turn in or make a left out. So the additional channelization that's shown in green on the south side of the intersection, that's a longer term kind of improvement. If we want to, where the lanes merge, you could actually kind of bump out that curb on the south side, but that's farther down the road. Again, we have a lower implementation cost for just the north side of the intersection there. So those are the recommendations from the study and the analysis that we've done. And so, yes, we are not recommending a traffic signal. Yes. The signal meets technical volume warrants that are one consideration that engineers take into consideration for whether a signal should be installed, but that volume is based almost entirely on what's turning right off of Jamestown Crescent, which is really a low conflict movement in the current configuration. And again, looking at evaluating all the different factors that we talked about as far as safety potential, pedestrian potential, cost, we feel like we're going to better address the issues on the corridor and get the biggest bang for our buck with what's being recommended. So, thank you. So, as far as next steps, we will be finalizing and publishing our full report this month, starting tomorrow, October, and then basically looking to implement those short-term recommendations essentially in the balance of 2024 and early 2025. So, the funding for a traffic signal had been set aside in the budget, and so the city can utilize those funds to basically implement these recommendations from the study. And so that's the presentation, and I'm sure we're gonna have lots of comments and questions.
How about this? We will shift you and John to this one. Jeff, if we could activate this microphone right here for our presenters, and I'll do my best rendition of Phil Donahue, the late great, I guess now, for questions or comments from our listening audience. Liz Paste, hey, over to you.
Hi. Hello. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate all the hard work that was involved with this. I do appreciate all the voices that were presented to the city and to city council, and for everybody's help, because this definitely meant a lot to me. I do have a question. I was with the Rest in Red, and my question is, because I thought it was a fascinating option, yes. If like 3 cars are going down the lane, let's say I'm doing the speed limit, and so I'm expecting the light to be green, but someone's going faster. Where does the sensor hit? Because I thought, am I going to be stopped because the car is going down a little faster? And I was just curious about that aspect, because I don't want to be punished for somebody else, per se, and how that works with the Rest in Red.
That's a great question.
About this.
Okay, that's a great question. So that is something we'll have to look carefully at, is just the spacing of the detectors, where they would be placed, how far in advance. It does get tricky on a multi-lane road, the scenario that you're talking about. I can't say for sure right now how and when and where it would utilize whose speed in that scenario if you're both basically approaching around the same point at the same time. But that's a scenario that we'll be we would be looking at carefully as we would figure out where to place the detectors and implement it. Yeah.
So what you're saying is, could this be done more evening when there's less traffic? Because I know at night we do have the race drivers. So I think that would be when it would work fantastically, and then there would be less traffic that would be penalized for somebody who was going fast. So.
Add that that's the normal way that this type of signal operation is functioned. And what we have to take a look at, we have the volume counts, and what we want to try and do is find that happy median where we have a relatively moderate level of traffic volume, so that we don't develop the scenario that you're talking about when you're looking at northbound and you're looking at southbound traffic. The controller is trying to make a lot of decisions, and so we want to make it really simple. So nighttime would be the best case, and yet to be determined. Again, sooner that we can start the operation, I think the better for the community in general. Yeah, that'll be it.
Thanks, and appreciate everybody using the microphones. We're actually live streaming this. You can watch it again later on YouTube. So we got a question back here. Okay, there you go.
Hi, I'm Vicki Greco, and I do have a question about race drivers in the morning. They are racing to the naval base. They are racing to Terminal Boulevard to get on the interstate. How would a Rest Red work so that we can make sure our neighbors are not trying to figure out, or the people who use Hampton Boulevard are not trying to figure out when they can speed, when the school zone lights are on or aren't on, and when they think that they can get away with going 50, 55 because no one's going to stop them because they have to get to work to the naval station. And that's what I've witnessed. That might be anecdotal, but I live off of Bowling on Brunswick Avenue, a couple of blocks off, but I really am very concerned about, I've been concerned for years, and there are many Larchmont teachers and parents here who have been concerned about the safety of our kids, are crossing guards. And I know you've heard that in the survey, but there are race drivers driving along Hampton Boulevard every single hour.
Great. Can we try to activate this one again? Jeff, can you hear me? Hey, there you go. Over here. You guys can take that one. Oh, this one? Okay. Take it out there. There you go. You guys are live.
So that's a great question. We can, with the same counts that we took, we would do the same analysis for when we think is the best time to end the operation. So, this is the sort of thing that it can be very dynamic in the sense that you've got to start somewhere, and then we do our observations, see what works best, because we do want to maintain some traffic flow on Hampton Boulevard, obviously, but we want to have a meaningful impact on the speed level. So we started there we go, I guess closer. We started a point, and then we go from there as to determine what's the best. I think for us, we would like to start with the most aggressive approach, if you will, and then if we have to dial it back some, then we think about doing that.
Got a question over here? Okay. I'll move over to you. There you go.
Thanks. Yeah. Don Rockwell here, Bowling Avenue resident. Have we ever considered simple enforcement of the speed limit? I know we try to legislate things, we try to fix things with surveys, but have we ever thought about just trying to enforce the speed limit? I mean, $500,000 could spend a lot of overtime hours out there.
Yeah. I don't know if any of you watched, I think it was last week's council presentation where Chief Talbot spoke about how the city's crime rates are starting to drop. One of the questions of one of the council members was, as a follow-up, well, you are starting to do well on the crime side, but there seems to be a lack of enforcement when it comes to traffic regulations. One of the items that was passed by council during the formal session was increasing the fine for motorists that are blocking intersections where the sign is posted. So the natural question was, well, is that going to be enforced? And so the chief recognized that there does need to be some effort put forward with regard to trying to do something about traffic regulation and motorist speeds and so forth. Obviously, he wasn't able to make a commitment necessarily at that time to say, yes, we're going to start doing enforcement at this level at this time, but he does at least recognize from council, from citizens, that there should be an additional effort put forward when it comes to speed level enforcements.
Yes, Mike. I'll come to you, sir.
One other thing that we're doing, thank you, Emily. We have a citywide safety action plan planning study. It was a federally funded grant, and we're taking a look at not only just Hampton Boulevard for other potential improvements, but citywide measures to improve safety throughout the city. The idea of this planning grant is once it's adopted by council, then we can go after funding, federal funding, to implement some of those improvements. So we are trying to take a focus on, from different approaches, on trying to curb, it's hard to change driver behavior. Since COVID, driver behavior has really gotten bad. I think the effort is going to be trying to swing that pendulum back to better behavior, but that takes enforcement and education. The engineering side of the house can only do but so much, I guess, to your point.
Okay, first of all, thank you for all the work you've done and for listening to the voices of the people who are going to be most affected by this. Very much appreciate your efforts. Two quick questions. One is, when you do the reconfiguration of Hampton Boulevard, are you considering widening the pedestrian sidewalks, which right now are so narrow, two people can't even walk abreast on those sidewalks? And the second question is, how are you going to measure success? I come from a data-driven profession. What's the measure of success? What parameters are you going to use to say, we did it, we won? Thank you.
Couple of great questions. This study this project didn't really take a look at the sidewalk widths on Hampton Boulevard. Throughout the city, we're trying to widen sidewalks or move sidewalks a little bit further away from the curb so that those individuals that choose to walk on the sidewalks are not as close to moving traffic. But we only have a certain amount of right-of-way that we can make adjustments in. And I don't think on Hampton Boulevard, I don't know that we looked at necessarily where the right-of-way is along the entire stretch, but generally speaking, the right-of-way is about a foot behind the existing sidewalk. So the city would have to go in and purchase additional right-of-way from residents. We don't want to move the sidewalks closer to the curb. If anything, we want to move it back away from the curb. Measuring success, good question. We have the before data. The before data includes the speed studies that we've conducted, and we've actually conducted, the city's conducted a few, Emily's team has conducted some as well, and we have the crash data. The success on the speed level is a little bit easier or can be realized more quickly by doing follow-up studies. You don't want to implement a study at least until after 30 to 60 days until an improvement has been made, because you want time for the motorist to adjust to whatever improvements that you've made. As far as the crash data, that unfortunately usually takes several years till you can really realize the trend of what's happening with the crash data.
Any other questions? Got one back here, then up to Chuck. I'll go. Chuck, you'll be next. All right.
Hello, I'm curious about putting in a dedicated crossing at Magnolia, because right now we have the light, but not a dedicated pedestrian crossing. And a large number of kids morning and afternoon are crossing there, and you see a lot of left-hand turns that are trying to beat the kids to make the turn. In some of the cities I've seen where you have the pedestrian actually goes a couple seconds before the light turns green. I'm curious if that would be an option here.
Good question. We do have a project. This is another grant. It's what we refer to as a revenue sharing grant from VDOT, where essentially the city pays, well, now it's 60%. We're back at half. Okay, pays 50%. VDOT pays the other 50%. So with that project, and it's FY26. Yeah, so 2 years before construction starts. We've got to go through the design phase, public engagement, and then award the contract. So that project will include pedestrian accommodations. Emily and her team is consistently working with us to do what you're referring to as a leading pedestrian interval. And what that means is when the pedestrian pushes the button, before the traffic that's moving in the same direction receives the green indication, then the pedestrian receives the walk for anywhere from 3 to 8 seconds, and it's based on the dynamics of a particular intersection. So that's something we're actually working on consistently right now, but you have to have the pedestrian signals obviously present to initiate that.
My question was kind of related to the same thing. At Magnolia and Lexington, would you still have pedestrian, push the button to change the lights?
Yes.
To get across to the library or, the other side?
Right. So if it's in red, to your point, and we haven't talked about how that would actually work, whether it would be a pedestrian-only phase. In other words, would the side street receive the green at the same time? But yes, if it's resting in red, just as it is today, and you push the pedestrian button, then it would allow you to cross the street, absolutely.
The only time I'm able to cross anywhere between those two is on the weekend. Early morning, traffic, but otherwise you got to go to the light. You got birds coming
Super. Got another question back here. Great.
Sort of to follow on his point about pedestrians, it seemed like this whole project was geared on the pedestrian who tried to cross Jamestown and Hampton during rush hour. That pedestrian has no common sense. You came in with a project that would hang up 20,000 drivers a day for that one possible pedestrian. It was a typical example of, if it ain't broke, fix it till it is. I'm so gratified. I'm a commuter, by the way, and I'm so gratified that y'all have changed your mind, backed off on that plan, and have something that makes great sense, tune up what we have, correct the real problems, and leave the rest alone. My only request is, don't turn your sights on North Shore Road, please.
Okay. Any other questions? Anybody else have a question? Oh, over here. I'll hit you, sir, then Jim. Is that okay?
Okay. Regarding the channelization, if I understand what you said, the early part of that would not involve Hampton Boulevard south of Jamestown Crescent. And I would just make the observation that as I frequently go out Jamestown Crescent heading north onto Hampton, looking back, I would like to see that where you're channeling 3 lanes into 2 a little more visible, particularly for the drivers on Jamestown, because you have to be sure that the drivers have actually moved over if there's no physical obstacle there.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and Emily actually brought that up as well as one of the enhancements. If we were to just move, let's say, with the first phase, that yes, we do need to recognize that we need to improve that lane drop that occurs south of the intersection. So part of what Emily's team would do is come up with an appropriate design to better advise motorists of their need to get over maybe sooner, yet to be designed, but that is certainly something that we'll be taking a look at with this project.
Yeah, John, my question/comment is similar, because maybe I don't understand how it comes out of Jamestown Crescent onto Hampton. Is there a physical barrier? Is there like a median thing?
Yes,
there?
a raised barrier.
Directs
Concrete,
you
yes.
onto Hampton into the right-hand lane.
Yeah,
and where does that come all the way down to James? I mean, how does that work?
So again, this is
yeah. Where does it come down to? Yeah, I guess
very
that's what I'm
rough
saying. Yeah,
schematic.
I'm not through it. Oh, I got it.
There you go. Try this. Yeah, we'll get off on that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, this is a extremely planning level concept, right? Without detailed design completed, but it's hard to see with the green, but essentially putting that median, the way it's shown right now, it would kind of go right to where the crosswalk is, essentially. So it would kind of start from there and then continue to the north, because on the north side, yes, north of the crosswalk, correct. Yes. Yes, so if you're turning off of Jamestown Crescent, basically you would have to turn into that outside lane and not try to, make a maneuver to dart over to the left. Yeah. Say that. I mean, it's a recommendation, but like a secondary recommendation to starting with the rest in red, the trees and the lighting. Yeah. And I think the intent would be probably to still keep a yield sign at a minimum, either keep it a stop or change the stop to a yield, because they would still need to yield to someone in the crosswalk. Yeah, the turn onto Hanover would be restricted, but just if somebody's trying to do that. So I don't think that we would fully channelize it because we don't want to encourage people to come up Jamestown and just have a free flow onto Hampton.
Let's go back here. Another question in the back here. All right. Hey, it's Wilson's. Hey there.
I'm just going to go back to enforcement. I mean, that was rejected pretty quickly, I noticed. And yet, it seems to me if we're ever going to actually address it, it should have been in that matrix. We know what it would cost. We know, I think, we can guess what it might, effect it would have on crashes. We can estimate whether people are for it or against it, all the metrics that you had up there, but it wasn't included. So is that just because you're the engineering people and you don't have any say in it, or? But it still seems like it would be a good idea to have it in there, because we're not going to do anything about it until it's, we know what the numbers are.
Well, I certainly didn't mean to dismiss that concept, but yeah, you're right. This is the engineering side of the house. You heard me mention engineering, education, enforcement. So, and then I tried to allude to the fact that the council has asked that the chief take a closer look to see what can be done about enforcement measures. So, I think that's something we can certainly include in the report, the final report that's made, and that'll be something that council will be able to take a good look at and help them, as if they don't need any help, but help them to get the chief to take focus a little bit more on speed level enforcement. Not just speed, but just traffic enforcement in general.
John, you could mention the device I asked you about today that was on the pole out here on Jamestown Crescent. That was a study too, right?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier before the meeting, we actually had, when I say we, it was actually Norfolk Police Department. They put out what they refer to as a black cat. It's a automated vehicle detection. It detects the volume and speed of traffic. You're used to seeing the tubes put across the roadway. This is a very non-obtrusive device that motorists can't even see if they're even driving 20 miles an hour. And the idea is that you will not get any sort of reaction from the public that slow down because they realize that a speed study is being done. So I just received the results last week and really haven't had an opportunity to take a look at the results and see what that means for us as we move forward to the next step, which is eventually going to be taking a look at Jamestown Crescent. We haven't forgotten about Jamestown Crescent, but obviously the focus of tonight's meeting is to give you the results and our recommendations for Hampton Boulevard.
Question back here, then I'll move over to this gentleman here. Okay. Yes, sir. Here you go.
Appreciate it. So my wife and I live on Hampton Boulevard. I don't think you need a study to figure out that they speed. Again, echoing enforcement, the cops want the opportunity to earn some overtime. Just let them pull people over. It'll change human behavior. When you do a criminal amount of speed, you get a ticket to show in front of court and you get your car impounded. That'll fix a lot of things. The other thing I have is, has there been any thought to rerouting truckers coming up Terminal Boulevard that's not a residential area, that they can actually use that to come through? And then you mentioned a red light camera might help enforce speed as well.
I'll take the last first, and that's the red light camera. All the red light camera does is enforces individuals that might be running the red at an intersection. Right now, General Assembly has not approved any of the localities to install what you're probably more closely thinking about, which is speed enforcement cameras, other than within school zones and construction zones. So that tool's just not available to us. What was the second part? Trucks on Hampton Boulevard. Boy, that's been a topic for, probably as long as I've been with the city, and I'm not going to tell you how long that's been. Council has and the city attorney's office has really done the best that we can do to try and regulate trucks on Hampton Boulevard. We can't, it's in the opinion of the city attorney that we cannot restrict trucks on Hampton Boulevard. You have to give trucks an opportunity to, it's a state highway. It's not only a state highway, it's the strategic, it's a part of the national highway system. Quarter of statewide significance, there you go, thank you. Which means you have even fewer, less ability to regulate traffic, especially with as it relates to trucks. So the measures that we've put in place, which restrict trucks during certain hours of the day, is the best that we've been able to do with regard to trying to cut down on the number of trucks that are on Hampton Boulevard. In addition to that, with part of the Hampton Boulevard Task Force, which is comprised of both council members here tonight, we've been really, especially the council members, have been working very closely with the trucking associations to try and improve driver behavior, especially when it comes to speeds and just behavior in general. We've put in a couple of measures to help supplement that. We have support from the Port Police to help regulate during the hours that trucks are trying to beat that timeline where the restrictions are implemented in the afternoon. So they've been working to try and make sure that trucks are not making that illegal right-hand turn, as well as Norfolk Police Department as well have been partnering. We've seen a lot of benefit working with the trucking associations, believe it or not. But the volume is what the volume is. I think it's anecdotally come down just a little bit because of what's happened with the bridge collapse. You know, there was a big spike. Not too bad for our port, but there was nonetheless a spike. But trucking and movement of goods is just something that the port is doing an excellent job of. There have been a number of improvements when it comes to the train operations within the port. They've invested tens of millions of dollars on train infrastructure to try and bring in more cargo through trains instead of relying solely on trucks. It's good news and bad news, right? Crossing terminal in Hampton. A couple of years ago, I guess it's been several years now, the port did put in for a grant request for construction of a overpass where the roadway goes over the trains, but the cost of that at the time was I think like $50 million. It's not a cheap endeavor, so it didn't get a lot of support at the time from ranking-wise, if you will. I mentioned earlier, we go after a lot of grants, but they're very competitive, to be quite frank with you. And we've been, as the side of the transportation side of the house, we've been very fortunate, quite frankly, in getting dollars from the federal government in lieu of spending your local tax dollars on a lot of these transportation improvements throughout the city.
We've got time for one more question. Sir, in the back here. All right. I want to pass the baton. Thanks.
If you could just clarify about the channelization, how far it would extend, will it interfere with turns onto Manchester or Bedford as it's being proposed?
So we would just need to do like a little bit further analysis to figure out, again, kind of that sweet spot of how far to extend it, considering the one driveway that's located on that block, and also making sure that, anyone driving north on Hampton Boulevard who would be in those two, the left and center lane would have an opportunity if they need to turn onto Manchester to be able to get into the right lane to do that in time. So it's not the intent to interfere with access to that block.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. Thanks, everybody. John Reams, raise your hand over there if you would, sir. Ed Reams, see, no short-term memory. Ed Reams just moved back into the neighborhood, been gone for a whole career in the news broadcasting world, and welcome back home, living on Magnolia. Welcome back to the neighborhood. He showed up just to meet neighbors tonight. That's kind of a cool concept. Hopefully you guys will come back at our next meeting and do the same thing. 2 real quick ones. Blood drive Wednesday here, starting at 1 p.m. till 6 p.m. So bring your blood, and we'll meet you with the vampires over here in the fellowship hall. And also, we're going to be doing a blessing of the animals on Sunday, October the 6th at 5 p.m. And I was told it's ecumenical. We don't care what the denomination, and even lizards and boa constrictors are welcome. We'll take anything on the green space. Hey, everybody, thanks so much. Thank you guys very much for being here. Have a great evening. Be safe out there.